Welcome to Cracking Cooperstown, where we talk all things Baseball Hall of Fame and Hall of Fame collecting. Join us as we discuss Hall of Fame voting, autographs, cards, baseballs, resumes, and trajectories. Debate and discussion as we look to crack the code to Cooperstown. Now here's your hosts, Jake Brewer, Dom Manna.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Legends Never Die, where neither will you if you know Jesus, for another episode of Cracking Cooperstown with my good friend, Dom. It's one of our favorite times of the year. Are you excited for Hall of Fame season, Don?
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of posts about it, and they are kind of fair that this is a not as deep of a ballot as some previous years. There was definitely, some openings made by Mauer getting in first ballot last year, and different things going on with the votes, and just in terms of who's on the ballot right now and who fell off. But it's the most wonderful time of the year for guys like me and you, because you get to follow it all. We're going to reference it a bunch in this, but definitely go follow Ryan Thibodeau and his team over at the Baseball Hall of Fame tracker. You can type in BBHOF tracker to Google, and it'll be the first thing that comes up. It's a spreadsheet that will pull up a few times throughout the show. And they're also over on Blue Sky if you want to follow they'll post every single public ballot over there if you're into that kind of thing as well. I know that's always fun to watch, but there's over 40% of the known ballots right now. So it's a sizable number. It's enough to start making these assumptions out of. And we definitely wanted to get out front here, between me having some car problems, Jake having some, family scheduling things with his two young kids. We were able to finally get around to recording this, and they'll be making the announcement this upcoming Tuesday, January 21st. We will have at least one new Hall of Famer. As we all know, there is a guy that is pushing for unanimous election that we'll get into later. But so we'll have at least one more joining the class of 2025, which already has two members, Jake. Dave Parker and Dick Allen were elected via the Classic Era Committee this time around. And, I'm happy I was wrong. I'm happy that, they put a ballot together. They put a committee together that was pro enough Dave Parker to get him over the hump. And man, it was just really, really great to the election. And if you want to talk about it as the guy who was like, this is the year for Dave Parker, I want you to have the floor here and lead off with the election of Dave Parker.
When full transparency, for those of you that watch the show, hear me and Dom discuss the Hall of Fame, I would not have voted for Parker myself. So I just don't want to sound like a hypocrite. I wouldn't have. However, on our prior episode with our good friend Frank over at Baseball Hall of Fame Autographs, I did say that I felt like this was the year for Parker if it was going to happen. And if he was going to get in, I'm thrilled that he is getting in while he is living. It's wonderful for him and his family. It's wonderful for Pirates fans. It's wonderful for the game of baseball. And I really think with the situation that Parker's in, with what he's facing and battling in Parkinson's at this point in his life, that it could potentially be one of the most memorable Hall of Fame speeches, if not just in recent memory, but possibly ever. I think it's going to be truly a touching moment in Cooperstown this summer when Parker delivers that speech. So congratulations to him. Also, congratulations to Dick Allen and his family. It's a shame that if he was going to be elected as a Hall of Famer, which should be recognized and celebrated for anyone that gets in the Hall, it's a shame that he didn't get in while he was still living. But I'll let you talk a little bit more about Dick Allen, because I know you especially are excited about his election.
I'm excited about both candidates, and I know I was the bad guy on our last episode ahead of the Classic Era vote, because I had Dave Parker buried on my list of likelihoods, and it was because I just didn't think, the committee that was put together would be pro enough Dave Parker to put aside all the just kind of grudges that people hold in the baseball world for decades and decades and decades. I wasn't sure it was going to happen. He had two former Hall of Fame teammates in Tony Perez and Paul Molitor on the committee, as well as I'm blanking on his last name, but he was the general manager from the Oakland A's back when he brought Dave Parker in the late 80s and helped the Athletics get over the hump, and he was a big part of that championship run and the resurgence of the swinging A's. So it was really great to see that, and the more I think about it, the more I think it's just so obvious with Ichiro Suzuki on this year's ballot, and both of them having, very famous throws from right field, that there's going to be a really sick promo that's made once the class of 2025 is official, with both of them throwing from right field, and really some special stuff. But not to be forgotten in this is justice for Dick Allen. Dick Allen, one of the best hitters of the 1960s, and just a really fantastic player. I know he's a peak case, and that's not your thing. But when you look at OPS plus from 64 to 74, he is number one in Major League Baseball. He was the best hitter in terms of against league average. 64% better during that stretch. He was a monster at the dish, a guy that dealt with a lot of demons on and off the field, and it was a big part of the reason why I don't think he got those voters to kind of let go of their grudges like Dave Parker was able to do. But I'm really excited for both of those guys and those passionate fan bases in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia that'll definitely be showing out in Cooperstown to celebrate the election of those two guys. Very, very deserving. And it's always nice when before the baseball writers ballot comes out that Cooperstown isn't going to be empty this summer.
Absolutely.
There's already two guys elected. There's going to be speeches. One of them's living, thankfully, and Dave Parker can, soak in that moment. And, I hope the speech is as magical as you're saying he can be, but just the fact that he gets to see it is all I care about. Regardless if he, puts on his best Lou Gehrig speech there in Cooperstown and, brings everyone to tears. But really, really fantastic, and congratulations to both of them. The one thing I wanted to add before we move on from the Classic Era Committee was the only other guy who got 3 or more votes was Tommy John, who was my number one pick. He got 7 votes. Every other guy on the ballot got 3 or less votes. So that was really shocking to both of us. We thought this was a slam dunk for Vic Harris. And I think, and we'll get into it with the writer's ballot about people cannibalizing each other, I think that the Negro League historians in that room didn't do a good enough job upselling Vic Harris. I think they tried to prop up Harris and Donaldson to go in together, and they split the vote too much to get enough of a consensus on either side there. And then it was just a really talented ballot altogether. So I'm not shocked that without some sort of collusion that people weren't able to agree on their 3 players. So, Dick Allen, he missed by 1 vote each of the last 2 times he was on the ballot. But then he got in by 2 votes. So he got 2 votes back and got elected. Dave Parker was the leading vote getter with 14 out of 16 of the committee. So that was about the one guy they were able to all really agree on. But really, really happy for them. And I'm interested to see how this Classic Era in the current structure continues to play out with how crowded it is. And, guys like Vic Harris not getting elected, that's a really prime guy that, should be on the next one, but maybe he's not. So it'll be interesting to follow that as well. I know me, you, and Frank were all surprised at Tommy John being the only other one where they put out the number of votes.
3, yeah. But so, that's one pool. That's a wide pool. This that we're going to be talking about today is a much more narrow pool. And I know Dom and I were talking pre-show that even though there are several guys on this ballot this year that will fall off just after this one go round, it's still an honor just simply to be listed. It's a narrow group just from that perspective. So we do want to, as we start to dive in to this year's writer's ballot, and there's a lot of different things we're going to talk about, we do want to take a moment here at the top just to honor some of the guys that haven't received any votes at this point, but being on the ballot itself is an honor. So who are those guys, Dom?
Absolutely. And this is where, instead of being the young man in the vintage world, I start to feel like the old man, because I watched the majority of a lot of these guys' careers. And it's really crazy for me to say that at 25 years old. But Carlos Gonzalez, 0% of the vote so far. I doubt anyone is going to give him that elusive Hall of Fame vote. I know there's a whole club out there of guys that got 1 vote that includes guys like Brad Penny. But I don't think Carlos Gonzalez is going to get a vote. Cargo had 2 really monster seasons, but was riddled with injuries and didn't really have, the cumulative career of a Hall of Famer, but a guy that, I was not sure if he was going to make it, and I'm glad that he got that honor of it. Curtis Granderson is next. The Grandy man had a really sneaky good career, actually, and was a great ambassador for the game of baseball. He does TV stuff now, and him being on the ballot, 0% of the vote, but still he made the Hall of Fame ballot. Adam Jones is a player that I'm actually surprised hasn't gotten a few votes because he was extremely popular during his playing days, during his prime. Adam Jones, 0% of the vote, most known for his time in Baltimore as, the face of that franchise for many years. Just a consummate pro, a good hitter, but again, not the cumulative stats that you would expect to see from a Hall of Famer. And then there's Hanley Ramirez, a guy who I will always have super fond memories of, not just because he allowed my Red Sox to get Mike Lowell and Josh Beckett back in the day as a top prospect being traded for them. And then the 2007 World Series happened, the first title I got to fully watch the entire run. But Hanley went on in Florida for a time there as one of the most electric players in baseball, a guy that was a 30-30 threat every single year, played Gold Glove defense at shortstop, was really, really exciting. Later on in his career, he came back to Boston as a first baseman DH type, and he fizzled out pretty quickly. But still a very, very amazing talent nonetheless that, again, gets this honor of being on the Hall of Fame ballot. Fernando Rodney, I think, got on this ballot simply because of his career number of saves. He's pretty far up there in the all-time save leaders just because of the way the game is played today. But Fernando Rodney, he played for a million teams. He's most known for the way he wore his hat, but he will always be a guy who got on the baseball writers ballot. Troy Tulowitzki, this one really hurts me. I loved Troy Tulowitzki growing up. Colorado Rockies, he was the best shortstop in baseball for a stretch there. Injuries kind of riddled his career as well. He played Gold Glove defense at shortstop, was really fantastic hitter, helped the Rockies go to their one and only World Series championship run in 2007 where they lost to the Boston Red Sox. So he was part of that team that brought them to the World Series, and really, really fantastic player, but again, just didn't accumulate enough stats. And the final guy is Ben Zobrist, super utility extraordinaire, who not only helped the Cubs break their World Series drought, their curse, but then the very next year the very year before, he was part of the Royals a couple years earlier, helping them win the World Series as well. So he helped two franchises that were, in a drought of World Series championship, and he contributed to them playing multiple positions, accumulated a fair bit amount of WAR for a guy that wasn't, the typical everyday player, and a guy that, there's actually been a really good video expose put out there by Foolish Baseball talking about why Ben Zobrist deserves a Hall of Fame vote. And it really is cool to think about, him being the first true impact super utility player. There was guys that played multiple positions at different parts of their career, but he was playing multiple positions and you didn't know where he was going to be in the lineup every day, but he was in that lineup at a different spot. So credit to Ben Zobrist, a winner and a great career. All these guys that get this honor, it's a great honor, and you had a great baseball career. But a trend with all these hitters that you'll see is, sub the rule of 2,000. Not getting 2,000 hits very much hurts your chances of making the Hall of Fame. We'll get into a few candidates that we haven't mentioned yet that also don't have 2,000 hits, but have a little bit more momentum. But it's an uphill battle when you don't have that round number of 2,000 hits, which isn't as easy as you would think to accumulate over a big league career. As we've seen, I talked about all these guys who at one point were all stars and, consider amongst the best in their leagues during their primes. And they didn't play long enough or play well enough to get 2,000 hits by the end of their career. So I want to give those guys a lot of credit because it's a big honor to be on this ballot. They were well above average big league players for over a decade of service. And, like I said, I feel old because I watched a lot of these guys and enjoyed watching a lot of these guys. So if any of those names pop out to you with any memories or things that you want to talk about?
Man, I'm just slightly older than Dom. But the thing that's crazy to me, seeing these guys are starting to hit the ballot of remembering their rookie year for the first time, or drafting these guys in fantasy baseball. I remember the days when Hanley Ramirez, you take him number one, or Albert Pujols, Tulo being one of those top guys in the league, seeing those guys. Zobrist was, everybody's steal mid or late in the draft because, he wasn't a superstar, but put up big numbers there for a stretch. And he was the guy when, he was kind of the man when Tampa first saw success, even before he helped with the World Series droughts and other places. So some good memories where we saw some of these guys play. We're starting to sound like the old heads a little bit of like, back in my day when I saw this guy play, let me tell you about him,
Yeah, and to come full circle on the old head thing. I don't believe any of these guys passed my eye test to be Hall of Famers before we get into their baseball reference pages. But like I said, I don't want to, make fun of these guys or harp on this. Like it really is an honor to be on the ballot. I know a lot of different programs will completely, they'll just list them as first time guys, but won't even talk about their careers. But I wanted to just kind of quickly go through and give them a little bit of limelight as guys that, haven't gotten a vote yet through 40%, are unlikely to get a vote through the rest of the process. I think there's a couple of guys there, and Adam Jones and Ben Zobrist, that might get 1 or 2 votes once everything comes out, but they're not going to get elected or get the 5%, to stay on the ballot to potentially get elected. So that nonetheless is there, but there are a nice little group of guys that have gotten some level of support in this ballot before we get to the 2 big dogs. And this is where I'll bring up the tracker from Ryan Thibodeau's thing. As you can see, all the guys that I just named are at 0%. So they have the percentage in red because it's below that 5% of safety. But if you look at the players that are in blue here on the top, it's their first year of eligibility. And Ian Kinsler is at 2.5%. I talked about not having 2,000 hits. He has 1,999 career hits. And when he ended his career with that number, when he retired, in that little stint he had with the Padres, I said it right then and there, Ian Kinsler just cost his chance of ever being a Hall of Famer. And it's because he had a sneaky amount of WAR, was a very good player for a long time at a position that is underwhelming. And if he could say to Dustin Pedroia and Chase Utley, 2 other second basemen on this ballot, that, I have, better numbers and I hit the rule of 2,000, you could make an argument for voting for Ian Kinsler over either of those guys. I think if he had 2,000 career hits, but he finishes 1 short, and it's sad. The 2.5%, I don't think he's going to hang on because a lot of the people that would consider him are already spending 1 or 2 spots on Utley and Pedroia.
And just for reference, if you're not familiar with the tracker, the projected number of votes for you to get 5% this year and remain on the ballot for next year is 20. And Kinsler, as you can see there, he currently has 416 votes short. And typically these, we'll call them lower end of the spectrum for the ballot. Typically, they do not get much private support on the ballots that are unknown historically. So the odds are Kinsler will not receive enough to stay on. He is technically alive, but unlikely.
Very unlikely, unfortunately for him. I loved watching Ian Kinsler. He was a really good ball player. He was a World Series champion with my 2018 Red Sox when he was filling in for an injured Dustin Pedroia, playing second base. Really fantastic career. He was part of those Rangers teams that made multiple World Series runs. He was traded to the Tigers for Prince Fielder, and he was an all-star player for great Tigers teams. Like I said, Boston, San Diego for a cup of coffee at the very end, didn't stay around to get that last hit. And it always bothered me. And seeing this percentage, I know that that's a big part of the reason why. Because if he had 2,000 hits, there's only one hitter that's a first-year candidate on this ballot that has over 2,000 hits. If he could be in that category, even as far off as he is from the other guy, I think it would help him stand out and stay alive, get that 5%, but it's not going to happen. I talked about with the Era Committee ballot, how I don't think they did a good enough job pushing Vic Harris over John Donaldson or vice versa. And it made people not really sure where to go. I don't understand it. I know from a framing point of view that you look at Russell Martin and Brian McCann, and they're like 2 of the top 10 framing catchers of all time. But I don't know how you say Russell Martin deserves to stay on the ballot and Brian McCann doesn't, or vice versa, because Brian McCann was my pick for that sneaky 5% sticking around guy because he had over 1,000 RBIs as a catcher, one of only 14 catchers ever to do that, and was a guy that had some pretty serious pop at the position as well, well over 200 home runs. You know, that's the kind of guy that, you know, with the way we're looking at catchers going forward, I think is sneaky relevant. And Russell Martin, you know, having a little bit more WAR than McCann because he's a better defensive catcher, has been, you know, throwing a whole wrench into things. People are viewing them as the same kind of player, and I just don't think they are.
And I'm not going to pretend like I really think either one of them are actual, you know, Hall of Fame candidates or they'll get election someday. I mean, we're talking about will it hang around on the ballot or not. But I'm not going to lie, I was surprised, even though it's just one vote, that Russell Martin has 7 thus far and McCann has 6. And, you know, we did our catcher episode on cracking Cooperstown not too long ago, and McCann was mentioned. Okay. We never even touched on Russell Martin. Like, that's how far away from what we believe in, even where Hall of Fame catcher is going, how far he is away from being a Hall of Fame catcher. So for him to currently have more than McCann at this point in the process, or even be close to him, really, is pretty shocking in terms of, you know, ballot nerds like us.
If it was just one of them on the ballot, I'd feel pretty confident saying they're going to get the 5% and stay alive. But I think both of them are going to butt each other out.
Yeah, I think they're going to both miss now.
Yeah, they're both sitting at below 4%, at below 5% right now. 4.3 for Martin, 3.7 for McCann, and that just makes me upset. It just makes me upset. I know it doesn't matter. I know neither one of them is a likely Hall of Famer, but it grinds my gears that these baseball writer nerds can't understand that they have to, you know, even if 2 players are similar, they have to sacrifice one sometimes to prop up another. Because we didn't talk about this for those of you that are unfamiliar with how the Baseball Writers Association of America voting process works. But you have to be an accredited writer as part of the association for over 10 years to have a vote. And the players that are eligible had to play at least 10 Major League Baseball seasons and be retired for 5 years to be eligible to be on the ballot. Then a committee decides which players' careers were good enough to be on the ballot, making it such the honor that it is. And, you know, you have to get 5% to stay on and 75% to get elected. So pretty big range there of where you can fall. But if you fall below 5%, you're done. So it's
10 years to get elected on this ballot now.
Yes, it used to be 15, but it is now 10 years that you have to get that 75%. Otherwise, you fall off as well. So that catcher dichotomy is what it is. This is where I start to feel ancient. I feel really old. So Laser Show 15 was actually my first YouTube handle on this platform. I used to comment on, you know, Baseball Card Junkie TV videos and Ray from Philly videos as Laser Show 15 before I changed my name to Saving Sports Cards. And he wasn't my favorite player. Albert Pujols has always been my favorite player, but as a not super tall gentleman that just played my sports tough, I was not a finesse guy. I played hard. He was such a role model for me growing up, and that's Dustin Pedroia, who I have right here, this unique solo shot from 2009. If you know, you know, my podcast, Solo Shot Sports. I had to get this when I found out this set existed. Dustin Pedroia autograph. He came into the league. He won a Rookie of the Year. He won a World Series, and then he won an MVP. Did he deserve that MVP? No, he did not. But he won an MVP. Okay? He won an MVP the year after winning Rookie of the Year, the very elite class of players that have done that in their first 2 Major League seasons. And like hustle, loyalty, respect. That was the whole thing. He dove for every single ball. He never gave up on a play, no matter how bad of a hit was. He ran hard to first base. You know, he didn't have a lot of power as a small guy, but he found ways to lift the ball. So many iconic moments as a Red Sox fan watching Dustin Pedroia. And for him to be on the ballot now, it's sad for 2 reasons. It's sad because, like I said, I feel old, but it's also sad because I don't think he had a Hall of Fame career. And you can make a serious argument that the reason why he didn't have a Hall of Fame career is because of the rule that was changed of Manny Machado sliding into second base, taking out his legs, and it really, he was on and off the injured list the whole rest of his career, pretty much. From then on, he didn't able to stick around and compile over 2,000 hits in those benchmarks that you would typically see from a Hall of Famer. But Dustin Pedroia does have over 14% of the 40% out there. He does look like a guy that's going to get the 5% to stay on the ballot. But the real question is, do you think he did enough as a peak case to eventually merit Hall of Fame election?
No. Sorry, I was letting you have your moment with Pedroia. And I always appreciate him as a player. He was a hard-nosed player. He played hard. Unfortunately, you can say if, but what, for a lot of players, but he falls in that category of, when he was playing, there was definitely the possibility. He definitely collected some of the hardware, some good numbers, good teams that he was a part of, but he just wasn't able to do it for quite long enough. Even as a peak candidate, I think he falls just short. But he is safe to stay on the ballot. He's received more than 20 votes, so he'll stick around for now. And by no means am I trying to give you false hope as a Pedroia fan, but second base is one of those positions that is going to potentially be redefined on what makes a Hall of Fame second baseman, both through this ballot and future ones. Not saying that Pedroia will get in and be part of that, but I think it is one of the positions that is going to transform a little bit.
No, that's fair. And we're going to get into a candidate later that, gives me hope that Pedroia might actually get his day in the sun. But essentially, Pedroia's career ended at 33 years old. He played 9 games after the age of 33. And in that time, he accumulated 51.9 WAR, 1,805 hits. He was a 299 career hitter, 4-time All-Star, 4-time Gold Glove, 2 World Series. He really won 3 for those 3 games that he played in 2018. He got a ring. But yeah, like a really impactful player on the game of baseball during his time. And I think that's what this whole Hall of Fame thing is when you're not talking about the slam dunks. It's about like impactful players that, left a stamp on the game, and to get really considered to get some votes for the Hall of Fame. It's another level of honor past just being on the ballot. And he actually talked about, I watched an interview of Dustin Pedroia on the Baseball Isn't Boring podcast, plugging them. They're that great show over there. He was talking about how the Hall of Fame sent him like a whole like letter with an official ballot talking about like how many players have played the game of baseball, how many have appeared on a ballot, and like what a kind of honor it is to like have his name on there. He like said he like looked at it and just thought it was cool, like reading through all the great players that were alongside his name. He was just a role model on and off the field, like great attitude, great baseball player, like all these things. I want him to just stick around all 10 years on the ballot. I don't think he's going to deserve to be elected. If he played, till 38, 40, like a lot of players did, and accumulated over 2,000 hits, I'd probably be voting for Dustin Pedroia. But he does not get my vote, and it's simply because the injuries got him too soon. So the next guy is another interesting guy who, again, makes me feel terribly old, and that is King Felix Hernandez. So Felix is one of my favorite pitchers I've ever watched. Again, like I love this guy. Watching the Kings court in Seattle, that perfect game was so electric in 2015. He, for a bad team, pitched crazy amount of innings, and the same kind of thing happened to him that happened to Pedroia. Basically, by his early 30s, he was done. He had given everything he did to the sport. And, I still collect Felix Hernandez. I have his 2004 Topps Traded rookie in a BGS 9.5. And I have this sick patch autograph.
That is sick.
Of King Felix. I loved watching the guy play. He was a dominant pitcher fantastic, struck out a lot of batters, but because he didn't accumulate a lot of wins, being on a bad team, didn't really hit any metrics for either of us there. And then the strikeouts, he struck out a lot of batters, but he didn't get to that magic number of 3,000. He won that one Cy Young Award, and he was part of the voter basis looking more analytically at pitching in the modern era, as he was only, I think, one game above 500 that year, and won the Cy Young. It wasn't just about the best pitcher on the best team anymore. It was about who is definably the best pitcher. So Felix Hernandez, another player that I had no doubt was going to stay on the ballot, especially with some of these pitchers that we'll get to as returning candidates that are sticking around on the ballot. I think he's better than most of them. But I don't think Felix Hernandez, pitched long enough to merit Hall of Fame consideration from me, but I know you think differently.
Yes, we do disagree on this one. It was bound to happen eventually. For me, on the recent pitcher episode of Cracking Cooperstown, I talked about how post the year 2000, I believe that 150 wins is something that should qualify someone as a secondary qualifier, and that 200 in the era going forward, barring a drastic change to how the game is played, 200 is a new 300. And that being said, King Felix had 169 wins. That's more than 150. Even if you think, okay, that's not enough. He did have over 2,500 strikeouts, 2,524. He did have a Cy Young. He did have 2 pitching titles. He did not reach my qualifier of 10 All-Stars, but he was an All-Star 6 times. He received votes multiple years for Cy Youngs that a couple maybe he arguably should have won, but played on some really bad Seattle teams. I think King Felix is not necessarily the quote-unquote bottom line of what a new Hall of Fame pitcher should be, but I do believe he's above that threshold for a starting pitcher going forward. Now, to get into what we've seen on the ballot so far for him, I was a little surprised. Yes, I'm pro Felix. Dom feels a little bit anti-Felix on his chances going forward, because so far on the known ballot, again, we know at the time of this recording, just under 42% of the known ballot that they expect to be cast. He received 25.8%. He's well above the marker to stay on. He's already safe. He received more than 20 votes, 42 total in terms of quantity, to stay on for going forward. I think for King Felix, year 2 will be much more telling on what his true potential as a Hall of Fame candidate will be. Like it or don't like it, I think it's a little silly personally, but there is still a large contingent of the voters that believe being a first ballot Hall of Fame player matters. And if they're a quote unquote borderline Hall of Famer, some writers refuse to vote for them in their first year of eligibility, even if there's not a stacked ballot. You look at the metrics this year of the ballots of being cast, of the ballots, the full 10 being used amongst all ballots so far is just over a third of all ballots being cast are using all 10 spots, 34.8%. The kind of the median of what we see happening more is the range from, 8, well, really 9 to 4 is the bigger range, but 8 to 5 is the sweet spot of where you see guys, using their ballot. How many in this current stance? So that being said, for Felix, year 2, looking at that jump, what he makes from year 1 to year 2, I think will be a really good early barometer of, is he on a Hall of Fame path or is he not? Because if we see him stick around this really low end percentage, I don't know if he'll be able to build it up, 50% over time before his 10 years runs out. So I'm surprised by his returns early, again, biased, but I think year 2 is going to be much more telling. I never thought he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
No shot at first ballot.
Yeah, agree.
If either of these guys have an induction ceremony at Cooperstown, I'll be there. bright and early. I love these guys. Felix Hernandez, the one thing I will agree with you on, I don't think either of them deserve Hall of Fame vote. But with Felix Hernandez, he has to do well early. Yeah. And the reason is the best thing that's on his side is the fact that after CC Sabathia, who's we'll get to looking like a first ballot Hall of Famer, there's a big like kind of chasm between them and Verlander, Kershaw, and Scherzer, who are all still actively pitching. So they're still actively pitching, and then they have to wait 5 years whenever they ring it up. So Felix Hernandez,
even Greinke's 4 years away.
Exactly. Hernandez has to pass the 50% threshold in his first 4 years on the ballot to even have a chance at election.
I agree with you there. I agree.
He has to get there in the first 4 years. If he doesn't, he's going to be in the same category of the guys that are hanging around on the ballot, the Andy Pettitts, the Mark Buerhles, Adam Wainwright is going to be in that kind of category. John Lester is probably going to be in that kind of category. Guys that might get elected, but might also just, be good enough to stick around. Yeah. So it's going to be really interesting. My bar for pitchers is clearly a lot higher than yours at this point in time.
Post 2000.
It doesn't mean that I don't, appreciate these pitchers for what they were in the era that they played. Speaking of CC Sabathia, I believe he is the next guy in terms of percentage, vote wise. I was a little nervous about CC Sabathia.
Really?
So 93% is where CC Sabathia currently sits. And I don't know if it was just like brain dead Twitter or what it was, but I saw a ton of people talking about how CC Sabathia is borderline. CC Sabathia wouldn't get my vote. He's not a first ballot guy because of that whole thing. He's comparable to Andy Pettitte. All these different people saying this. CC Sabathia is one of 3 left-handed pitchers in the history of the game with over 3,000 strikeouts. Steve Carlton and Randy Johnson, the other 2. He is one of 3 black aces with over 3,000 strikeouts. Bob Gibson and Fergie Jenkins are the other 2. He is one of 19 pitchers in Major League Baseball history with over 3,000 strikeouts. The only ones not in the Hall of Fame are either active or are Roger Clemens and Curt Schilling. CC Sabathia is not as controversial as Roger Clemens or Curt Schilling. He has over 250 wins in this modern era. I know he debuted, a little before your little caveat, but
still got 251.
250 wins is big time.
Yeah.
And he had the peak too. He had that peak from 2007 to about, 2012, 13. He was one of the best pitchers in baseball. He won a Cy Young. He single-handedly lifted the Brewers to a playoff. Yes. He first year in New York helped the Yankees win their last World Series back in 2009. Feels like forever ago. He helped them win a World Series and was top 5 in Cy Young voting 4 times throughout his career where he didn't win. And then he had that one win in 2007 with the Indians as well. Fantastic pitcher that I was a little worried that he was going to not get in first ballot. I knew he was going to get well over 5%, but I did not think he was going to get elected this first time around just because of what I was hearing. Even though the ballot is a little shallow, I was like, some people are just making up excuses at this point to not vote for CC Sabathia, a guy who's gotten involved in the media since he retired, was relatively likable when he played as well, had that great documentary put out about, his final season and stuff. Mm-hmm. He's a Hall of Fame pitcher. He's not an inner circle top tier Hall of Fame pitcher, but he's a Hall of Fame pitcher. You can still get his 99 Bowman Chrome rookie card for pretty affordable prices. I would recommend getting one before the election. Otherwise, wait. And his autographs, I was looking to just get like a lower end on card autograph of CC Sabathia. That was my goal when I set out, and I figured out what the prices were, and I was able to get this.
It's a sweet patch.
It's not on card, but it's a sick patch auto, numbered to 75 from SP. So I have another Hall of Fame autograph here because he's going to get elected. I'll get into this more when we talk about Andy Pettitte, but Like, tell the people why CC Sabathia is a level above these, middling pitchers that hang around on the ballot.
People talk about the 300 win club in baseball being so exclusive and we'll never see another one. At the time of this recording, there are less members in the 3,000 strikeout club than there are the 300 win club. Mm-hmm. CC Sabathia is elite. Period. Like, he's in one of the most elite clubs in the sport. There's no way he's not a Hall of Famer. Like, to me, he's one that, like, you almost talk about, like, yeah, duh, he's a Hall of Famer. Let's talk about the quote unquote more interesting candidates.
He should be. But people ahead of the ballots coming out were like, nope. But thankfully, the baseball writers, they make some mistakes over the years, but they seem to be on their game with this one. He's not going to get 100% of the vote. That's already been proven, but he's going to be well over 75% and be part of this class, which I'm very, very happy for him.
Yep, we're going to have at least a 4-man class. So
exactly. And the reason we're going to have a 4-man class is because, the elephant in the room, Ichiro Suzuki. If you are a fan of the PSA post-war rookie Hall of Fame checklist, the SP Authentic that is numbered is the key rookie that not anyone can actually afford and own. But I have his Topps rookie, and that's good enough for me. Ichiro Suzuki is kind of what we just said, that boring candidate, the like, let's move on, super obvious, but I want to spend some time here because I talked about through age 33, Dustin Pedroia having, 51 WAR. Ichiro Suzuki had over 60 WAR, and he entered the league at 27 years old. So he started at 27. He did play until he was 44 years old, basically. I know he played those 2 exhibition games at 45, but essentially 44 years old. But he didn't just come in and, compile numbers, which is what a lot of people call him. They're like, oh, he shouldn't be unanimous. He's a compiler, etc. He came in and took the lead by storm. He helped, win MVP and Rookie of the Year first year in the league, right over from Japan, 21 years old. He broke George Sisler's single season hit record, which will stand forever. No one's going to hit 262 hits. Nobody's going to hit that.
We're lucky if we get one 200 hit player a year now.
There's a couple a year.
Yeah, like 1 or 2 every year. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
That's okay, I'm not done.
For 10 straight years, a decade of 200 plus hits.
Well, you know what else he did for a decade when he came into the league? Won Gold Gloves in right field in the American League. He was the first player ever to win 10 straight Gold Gloves to enter the league. Nolan Arenado since tied that. But he was the first player to do that coming over at 27. So 27 through 36, he was winning Gold Glove. And I talked about it, the throws from right field. He was, money. But that's not all. That's not all. He accumulated 3,000 hits in the majors. If you combine his Japanese hits, he has more hits than Pete Rose. I know you don't buy that, but that's something. That is something.
Ichiro's the man, but I don't buy that.
The Nippon League in Japan is not scrubs. We see the best players coming over here and dominating, from Ichiro to Ohtani. So that means something. I'm not going to give him the hit king record, but it means something. And he also has over 500 stolen bases. Mm-hmm. He came over at 27 years old, played into his 40s, and he has over 500 stolen bases. 300 is a legit base stealer to me. Man had 500 from the age of 27 on. And we talk about this all the time when players debut, post 25 years of age, like how they're behind the curve for Hall of Fame consideration. I know Ichiro was already a seasoned pro when he came over at 27, but for him to compile the American stats that he did, over 60 WAR, that matters to me. Over 3,000 hits, that matters to both of us. Over 500 stolen bases, it's almost double my qualifier. With 10 Gold Gloves, that's a qualifier for both of us. And the man hit over 300 in his career. We're talking about how uncommon 200 hits is. There was only 8 players in 2024 that hit over 300. Only 8. There's only 2 active players, minimum 1,000 at bats, that have a career average of 300 right now in the major leagues. Mm-hmm. Enough said. He should be unanimous. He has every vote so far. I don't think he's going to get it because there's always some curmudgeon baseball writers that don't put out their public ballot.
Well, to balance you out and speak on Ichiro for just a second, I'm going to say yes because I'm Mr. Optimist on that. He'll get 100%. He'll be number 2 on the writer's ballot to do that in the modern era. I love Ichiro, and I honestly probably didn't appreciate him enough while he was playing. I was 10 years old when he came into the league in 2001. So, I remember his whole career. And part of my batting stance to this day and style of hitting is like Ichiro, the hit him where they ain't, left-handed guy getting out of the box fast, like infield hits. Like I model some of what I do in softball now after Ichiro. Now, obviously I know him, but that tells you how much I admire the player. And he's just incredible. As a fan, probably one of my biggest disappointments when I got married, we went to Seattle as part of that before we went to Hawaii and had scheduled for us to go to a game. We were sitting 5 rows behind home. Actually saw King Felix versus Shohei Ohtani pitch that day. Mike Trout played in that game. He had a home run and stole a base. But my biggest disappointment, that was early in the year in May, Ichiro did not play. He retired officially like 10 days before that. I was so disappointed because he's one of my favorite players ever in my lifetime that I could have seen that I didn't get to. That was my one shot at it. So pretty cool seeing him now, potentially get 100% and get into the Hall of Fame. I need to add more stuff to my collection of him. I need a baseball, but I'm probably going to have to wait for now.
Yeah, I thankfully got to see the pair of Hernandez and Ichiro when they came to Fenway. That was a really cool experience. Ichiro had a couple hits. And I talk about it with Luis Ariz as like the modern day, slap ball hitter.
Yeah.
About how people don't appreciate just guys that, put bat to ball and put the ball in play. I've seen so many, guys that thankfully don't have a baseball writer's vote, talking about how his career OPS plus is like 109 and how his on-base percentage isn't much higher than his batting average. He didn't walk enough for a leadoff hitter. And it's like, what were you watching?
Yeah.
What were you watching? This is one of the greatest players that I've ever seen. And, from arm to base stealing to contact hitting, like he was absolutely, absolutely electric, and a guy that, is going to have a huge crowd as the first Japanese-born Hall of Famer elected to the Hall of Fame. They're not going to have any trouble selling tickets, and hotels are probably already booked up. But Ichiro Suzuki, I'm glad he's at 100% so far. I thought Mariano Rivera was going to start a trend, man. I thought Mariano Rivera, who was a very unlikely person to break the curse, I thought he was going to start a trend, and that every other obvious Hall of Famer from then on out
didn't get it. Yeah,
100%. And it didn't happen. The very next year, Jeter didn't get it, and it's been just a spiral from there. Man, I'd love him to get that and maybe restart it. Like, hey, now 2 people have done it. It's not as prestigious. Like, give it to Albert Pujols, give it to Miguel Cabrera, give it to Justin Verlander and stuff down the line. Like,
Ichiro's going to get it, man. He played in Seattle for the majority of his career. Who hates Seattle? And who have you ever heard of?
He was a Yankee and a Marlin. Those are two pretty storied franchises,
Marlins? But like, meaning who dislikes Seattle? And like, have you ever heard a fan say like, a player I really hate, Ichiro Suzuki? Like, no. I just feel that he will. We'll see. But
I hope you're right. I hope, just like the Dave Parker thing, I hope you're right. But he will be in Cooperstown with Dave Parker, and that's what matters.
Yes, he will.
So we've been going for 50 minutes here, and we're just through the new names. There are returning candidates on this ballot as well.
There are.
And some of them are more exciting to talk about than others. I'm going to go in order of percentage at this point. And the one we have to start off with is Torrey Hunter, man.
Torrey Hunter.
1.9% of the vote so far through 42%. he's going to fall off, and he doesn't deserve to fall off. I think he's closer to the Hall of Fame than he is to, not deserving the 5%. And it's really crazy. I know you're going to combat on this. You have to draw the line somewhere. He doesn't hit any qualifiers, XYZ. Andrew Jones' main Hall of Fame case
You're going to pit Andrew Jones against him?
Yes. His main Hall of Fame case, and part of the reason why you vote for him is because he hits your 2 qualifiers of 400 home runs and 10 Gold Gloves. Torii Hunter has 359. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that's not, that's not a sizable gap. That's one monster season where you hit 50 home runs and 40 something home runs and win the Gold Glove. That's a monster season. But in the grand scheme of things, when you look at, the players that have 300 home runs and 10 Gold Gloves, the club doesn't get that much bigger. When you drop it from, to 359, it doesn't get that much bigger. Like, Torii Hunter's still in an elite class of players that have played the game. I know there was a certain part of baseball history that didn't have Gold Glove awards, and it's a newer award, and XYZ. Some people say it's subjective, but I think if you win more than 5, it's not subjective. You're unanimously one of the best defenders in your league. I don't think Torii Hunter, is going to be elected by, even an era committee going forward, just because of how stacked the contemporary era ballot currently is.
Stacked.
But he deserves to go the full 10 years, man. He was a consummate professional, 9 Gold Gloves, 350 home runs. That's not that much different than Andrew Jones. And I know if you look at the rate stats outside of batting average, Andrew Jones is better in the rate stats under the hood. I'm not saying Andrew Jones' best is similar to Torii Hunter's best, but what the final product ended up being is pretty damn close. And Torii Hunter, unlike Andrew Jones, is above that rule of 2,000. Part of it's because he didn't fall off as hard. He was a quality player late in his career, but a significant player of his era, Torii Hunter, that is going to fall off the ballot, and I think it's a sham.
I love Torii Hunter. Yes, I'm a no on him, but I love Torii Hunter. Spider-Man was electric in the outfield. And he is one of those guys that, like, if he somehow did get in, I wouldn't be upset. I'm singing a different tune if the man has 47 more hits. He would hit 2,500 hits. 47. I know. Got to drive the line somewhere. That's what I'm going to say. But that's how close he was to that. For 48 more home runs, I believe it is, and he gets to 400. I'm singing a different tune. He hits 2 of my metrics, right? And even with his runs and his RBIs that he had, like, you like these numbers, 1296 and 1391. Like,
that's legit.
That's not chump change. It's not my 1,500, but it's not chump change. So, like, to me, Torii Hunter is the Hall of very good. Just miss. I don't think he'll be a Hall of Famer. I wouldn't vote for him. But, I mean, he's a lot closer than most of our listeners, if you ask them about Torii Hunter, would say.
I didn't vote for Torii Hunter last year, and he only got 7% of the vote. And then I re-looked at Torii Hunter, and I was like, he actually meets over 4 of my qualifiers. Like, he should be a Hall of Famer in my book. Now, I don't think he's going to get. I didn't think he was going to get elected, but I was hoping he wouldn't fall off the damn ballot, and that's what's about to happen. So now he's going to turn into one of those guys that I prop up in these era committee conversations.
When he's made it to it, this is his 5th ballot. He's stuck around for this many, and suddenly he's going to fall off on a non-stacked year. It's kind of weird because, I mean, you look at we're going to talk about this for several players going forward. You're going to look at the, gain net plus minus votes, gained votes and then lost votes. For Torii Hunter, he's gained 1 new vote from a returning voter from last year, but he's lost 4. Like, on a non-stacked ballot, even though it's just 4 guys, why would you suddenly be like, nope, I'm out on Torii Hunter?
It's unbelievable to me. And not that I want to spend, a big chunk of the show on Torii Hunter, but I do want, the Cooperstown justice to be heard. And, even me, who's pretty dialed into like what I consider a Hall of Famer, like, I was overlooking how good Torii Hunter is. Yeah. And it just does not make sense to me. I think what's happening here is what I said should have happened with the McCann Martin situation. And it's that, people are seeing Andrew Jones is closer to the finish line and Torii Hunter is probably not going to get there. And they're pushing towards Andrew Jones' election, who has the slightly better round numbers. And they're letting Torii Hunter fall off when really both of them should stick around, because once Jones gets in the next couple of years, Hunter will still have a few more years to build up some support and maybe hit 50, 60%. Yeah. But that's not going to happen now. And it is a total shame, because there are plenty of guys, Pedroia and Hernandez included, that I don't think are as close to the Hall of Fame as Torii Hunter, and they're going to stick around, and he is not. So,
but that's
giving him his flowers.
That's why you come to Cracking Cooperstown, though. We're not going to spend an hour on Ichiro and CC Sabathia. We're going to talk about to the diehard Hall of Fame fans. We're going to get in the weeds on some of this stuff. Because the nuance not only is a projection of what will happen in the future, but it's a more interesting conversation than let's spend an hour talking about, as much as I love him, Ichiro. We're not going to do that. And that's why these next couple candidates that Dom's about to talk to us about, we're going to go a little deeper dive on. So who's next after Torii Hunter?
In terms of percentage, it's K-Rod, Francisco Rodriguez. I know our good buddy Lou Rock has put out the bold statement that I don't completely disagree with, but I don't think either of them are Hall of Famers to me, that Francisco Rodriguez is a better closer and more deserving Hall of Famer than Billy Wagner. K-Rod, is well into, he just got passed, but when he retired, he was submerged in the top 5 all time in saves. Mm-hmm. He has a single season save record, struck out a ton of batters for a reliever, over 1,000. He's one of 14 relievers to do that. Really fantastic career, a notable name, the glasses. He was famous. He's sitting at 8% right now. So he's someone that could fall off the ballot, could stick around. But I think if he sticks around, there is the possibility, with the Wagner votes opening up, that a chunk of those guys go to pumping and building up the case for Francisco Rodriguez. So on a simply saves and strikeouts basis, what do you think of K-Rod's future outlook if he can hang around on this ballot?
I think realistically that if K-Rod continues to hang around, Wagner gets elected, that I think his best shot is someday on an era committee of he's the forgotten reliever that should have been in. I think that's his best case scenario. Because even though we have seen him gain 4 votes this year, he's just 7 away from, staying on the ballot projected for that 5% or above. And he's even one of the guys that actually gains slightly compared private to public ballot by 1%, meaning that he'll trend about the same or maybe gain just a tick. So if we use the numbers that he has right now to project where he'll finish at, that means he would gain about a percent and get up to 9, maybe 10%, which would be an improvement of just, a couple percentage points from last year. There's just not going to be enough time for him to, I think, build enough momentum year over year to get to that point on the writers' ballot.
I disagree. I don't think that he deserves to. We're going to get to Billy Wagner. I don't think Billy Wagner's a Hall of Famer, but I think
Wagner has the left-handed narrative.
But Wagner also has the because 500 saves wasn't even a club,
right?
We talk about forgotten relievers on era committee ballots. Lee Smith was the all-time saves leader. Yeah. He did not have 500. 2 guys who the name for the best closers in the league awards are after, like Hoffman and Rivera. They're the guys that created the 500 and then 600 save club. They're next level in terms of saves. So Billy Wagner and Lee Smith's election, 400 saves in 1,000. Talk about guys like Craig Kimbrell and Kenley Jansen coming down the pipeline. Wagner's election makes people that hit those couple numbers and don't have a ridiculous ERA legitimate candidates to me. And I'm not saying they deserve to be. I just think that, if Francisco Rodriguez can hang on and not fall off, because he is slightly in danger of falling off, there's a chance that he can build up over time and get serious consideration from the writers, especially because Jansen and Kimbrell and Chapman are all at least like 6-7 years away from being on the ballot. So he has all those years to build up support.
As the guy,
to Lee Smith.
He would be the guy for the category after Wagner. I agree there. I just, man, we're talking nearly a decade in the future. But I just don't think you'll get enough while he's on the Riders. I do think if he manages to hang around, I think he'll build a little momentum following Wagner's election. I agree with you there.
Yes. People aren't going to vote for 2 relievers, most people.
But I don't think there's any way he gets in with the Riders. I just don't. Wagner's had such a hard time. Anyone not named Rivera or Hoffman has had a pretty hard time.
I think that this could be that shift. Maybe. The official Wagner election could be that shift. So I have some hope for Francisco Rodriguez as a Hall of Fame candidate, even though I wouldn't vote for him personally.
I wouldn't either.
So the next guy is David Wright, who is trending above K-Rod, which shocks me. 11.1% he's trending at. He was a guy that I thought was going to be on the borderline of 5% last year, got over that marker. But what are we doing here? I know third base isn't the most well-represented position in the sport. I know a lot of people talk about Scott Rowland being the guy who watered down the Hall of Fame when Scott Rowland has over 2,000 hits and over 70 WAR and 8 Gold Gloves. Like, he was a fantastic player, and people are like, yeah, Scott Rowland's the reason the Hall of Fame sucks now. Third base is there are some guys outside the Hall of Fame, Ken Boyer, Greg Nettles, Buddy Bell, that I would, Darrell Evans, I'd pump up for the Hall of Fame. But David Wright, I don't think he's ever going to do enough. I understand, the peak case and the whole what could have been narrative is always really fun. I think that's part of the reason why Pedroia is getting some support. With the injury, like what could have been, he was on a great pace in terms of WAR and counting stats as well. If Wright stayed healthy, he could have been a Hall of Famer. He was that kind of talent, no doubt. Played his whole career with the Mets. That helps. But I don't think the conversation doesn't go anywhere past that. I don't think he's going to build up any serious support.
His numbers compared to Torrey Hunter's are a joke. And David Wright's 2 votes away from getting the 5% and staying on. I'll leave it at that. I mean, he's sub 1,000 runs. He's sub 1,000 RBIs. He's sub 2,000 hits. He's sub 50 WAR. Like, he had a really strong, promising start to his career. Injuries derailed it. We can't say what if and put somebody in the Hall of Fame. You shouldn't do that.
He had like a mid-tier Hall of Famers prime.
Yeah.
But he didn't have the second half accumulation that those mid-tier Hall of Famers had.
It's a shame. Wright's a very likable guy, but it just didn't happen.
Yeah. So the people that are putting their votes out for David Wright and letting Torrey Hunter fall off, I don't get it. The next guy is Omar Vizquel. I know you would vote for him. I was a guy that was pumping him up as well, but I do think this is an actual place where the writers have successfully used the character clause. I know some of those rumors got dropped and there was a settlement, but that's not the kind of guy that the writers should be honoring, especially with him actually being a borderline case. We talk about Curt Schilling all the time as like a guy who was not a borderline case that got screwed by the writers. Vizquel, he compiled a lot of hits. He was a Gold Glove defensive shortstop, but he's a fringy Hall of Famer. And I'm okay with him not getting, big time support. He was trending really well before all the allegations came out, and now he's right where he should be. He's not bad enough to fall off, but he's not good enough for me to see him gaining real momentum.
So I'm the pro Vizquel guy. Let's just look at some trends over the last couple years of him. You mentioned the trend for him. In 2022, he received 23.9% of the vote. He dropped to 19.5% in 2023. Last year, he dropped it a little bit more to 17.7%. Thus far this year, he's gained 6 votes, lost 3 for a net gain of 3. If all prior trends held true, meaning, who typically votes for him privately, percentage-wise, who typically votes for him publicly, that remain percentage-wise, if all of that held true, he'd do a slight bump up at 19%. Now, I would vote for him. He had over 2,500 hits, 2,877, 11 gold gloves, well over the 7 qualifier for me. One of the elite defenders, especially in the last quarter century in the game. You can make an argument against him as a compiler. I'm very pro Milestone. Everyone knows that. Mm-hmm. But with the controversy surrounding him, whether it was dropped, allegations, not, we've seen plenty of other players for other reasons with allegations that haven't gotten in. I think it's going to do enough damage to Vizquel. I think he's going to be stuck in 20% purgatory here for the remainder of the ballot. Like, he's going to stay between 15 and 30. He won't get in on the writers, and his only hope will be on an era committee someday when maybe it's not as important to whoever happens to land on that committee that makes that decision.
And that's where he should fall into it, because statistically, yeah, he's over my Hall of Fame line. He did enough. But I don't think the writers deserve to, I don't think the writers should, and I don't think that they will give him that spotlight. And I think that's deservedly so. I don't think that that's the kind of guy that needs to get propped up. There's plenty of, older or deceased guys with similar or better stats that have been waiting to be in the Hall of Fame for a long time that he needs to get in line behind. So that's how I feel about Vizquel. It's not that he's not Hall of Fame worthy. It's just like not with the writers, not during these years of his life. Going next is, I believe, Jimmy Rollins is next at 19.1%.
Yes.
Jimmy Rollins.
Nope, there's one before him.
There is?
Yep.
Who did I miss?
My boy, Mark Buerhle.
Oh, that's why I missed that. I wasn't talking about a Hall of Fame candidate. That's why.
Don't you stick up?
We're talking about Hall of Fame candidates here, Jake.
Oh, come on.
Mark Buerhle's not a Hall of Fame. He threw one of the most memorable perfect games ever. I'm a big Ken the Hawk Harrelson fan. I love the calls from that game. There was that amazing diving catch, the flip that he made. That was electric. He's not a Hall of Famer. And he's in that kind of like middling range because there's only so many real Hall of Fame pitchers that pop up on the ballot. And when they do, they get in like first or second ballot. So people feel like I can't just vote for all hitters. I gotta throw some votes at some pitchers. And he's just sticking around, man. Like that's what he did his whole big league career. He just stuck around. Quality Q, Jose Quintana, like that kind of guy, that just
he's better than Quality Q. I love Quintana, but he's better
good
than him.
He's just good in your rotation. That's what Mark Buerhle was, man. Even when he was an eighth of a staff, he had close to a 4 ERA. He pitched bulk, he pitched quick games, so he would have been great in this era of the pitch clock. But the strikeouts aren't there, the wins aren't there, the WAR is barely there. So
let me get on my Buerhle soapbox. I'm gonna talk about him for a minute. Okay, I'm pro Mark Buerhle. Over 200 wins, post 2000.
First Hall of Famer there, automatic.
Buerhle meter, baby. Okay, we all remember the play, the flip behind to first base. Can't forget that memorable moment. If you're just hitting moments, Dom. But seriously, at least 8 guys that have votes for the Baseball Writers of America must listen to Cracking Cooperstown, because Buerhle has gained 8 votes. Okay. He's not lost any. He's gained 8. He's one of the biggest vote gainers from known ballots. Okay. There's only 4 other guys in front of him in terms of that. And Dom knows I'm kind of messing with him because I'm pro Buerhle, but let's take a look at the trend here for just a second. Stick with me. Okay. Humor me. In 2022, Buerhle had 5.8%. 2023, he had 10.8%. Okay. Dropped a little bit in 2024, 8.3. If the trends hold the way it currently is, he's going to jump up to around 14 or 15%. Okay. If we're talking about a guy like K-Rod, now different position, different scenario, I understand. But if he's a guy that could hang around on the ballot without any other huge candidates in his category, that somewhat applies to Buerhle. Now, he does have King Felix. Okay, King Felix is definitely in line in front of Buerhle. Now, we're going to get to Pettit in a second, so I'm not going to harp on him. He's got some other things going on with his candidacy. But outside of that, Buerhle's the next best candidate, pitcher-wise, on the ballot. And the next couple years, there's some in the same range as Buerhle. But until Greinke, who's the next guy that you're like, yep, clearly above Buerhle, definitely a Hall of Fame pitcher?
That explains why people are voting for Mark Buerhle. That doesn't explain why Mark Buerhle's a Hall of Famer. Your whole argument was why, like why he's going to stick around.
I want to talk about the trend.
He's trending for 15%. Like, what are we doing here? Like, it's the same conversation as David Wright, man. Like, what are we doing? You're just throwing a vote away when you vote for Mark Buerhle. Like, it's not, you're not doing anything there. And like I said, not only is Greinke coming down the line, but the Wainwrights of the world, the Lesters of the world, the Hamels of the world, like those guys are coming down the pipeline too. And they are just as good, if not better, than Mark Buerhle when you look at the counting stats and different things. Buerhle has over 60 WAR. I'm fine with him getting over 5% and sticking on the ballot. But as a legitimate Hall of Fame candidate through the writers, absolutely not. If you want to get some money action on K-Rod versus Buerhle for who gets elected by the writers, I'm willing to do some sort of bet there. But I think that, he doesn't have that same narrative that I just laid out for K-Rod. There's going to be other starting pitchers that hit the ballot that are, in the Felix Hernandez range.
Him and Wainwright are very similar. Buerhle and Wainwright are very similar. My point being is, for most Hall of Fame people that like discussing the Hall, they're going to say, why is Buerhle even on the ballot? I think he's actually going to build a little bit of a percentage. I don't think he's going to get him from the writers. I don't. He would be down the list on a committee if he ever even got on a committee ballot. Let me finish the sentence. I think that he's an overlooked, underappreciated player. It's not a complete waste of a vote if there are voters that vote for guys to keep them on the ballot. And that exists. Like it or not, it exists.
Yeah, but I mean, 15% and Hunter's going to fall off. Why can't they both get 7?
I don't disagree with that. Okay, I'm going to jump to Pettit for 1 second. Okay, to compare a trend.
Oh, man.
Pettit's candidacy makes no sense to me.
It doesn't, but I'll tell you why.
In the same time frame as Buerhle, okay, he went from 10.7% to 17 down to 13.5. And if all things hold true, based on what's happening right now, Pettit is plus 18 in the net positive on gained or lost votes, which, if all projections hold the same, he would jump to 31% all of a sudden out of nowhere in his 7th year on the ballot, with controversy surrounding him.
He's the one benefiting from what you're talking about. He would be the one that you could argue
that he would get in.
That potential Francisco Rodriguez boom effect is like why I was worried about CC Sabathia is because people were comparing him to Pettit. That was like the most common comparison. If you go to Baseball Reference and go down to compare, Andy Pettit's the first name. But outside of the strikeouts, if you look at their careers, there's some similarities. Sabathia is better across the board, but there are similarities. There's 2 major reasons why I won't vote for Pettit. Not enough strikeouts. He has like a 2,200 or something. He has a smaller number. I forgot what the exact number is.
2,448.
Okay, so he's under 2,500. So he's under 2,500. CC's over 3,000.
Yep.
And a lot of people are pumping up because of the playoff record. He has like a fantastic playoff ERA, a lot of playoff wins, because he was part of that early 2000s Yankees dynasty, and then he helped that the early to mid 2000 Astros have that really good run that they had.
Yep.
So he had a lot of playoff experience, and he pitched in those big games.
He had 256 wins too.
Yeah,
that's 5 more than CC.
Yeah, Pettit will never get my Hall of Fame vote simply because he took HGH.
Yep.
And what he did, and I know you are appreciative of this, but I don't think it matters, is he came out and apologized for it. Mm-hmm. He was very sorry for it. He's part of the Yankees core 4. I think Rivera and Jeter are obvious Hall of Famers. Posada and Pettit are obvious Hall of very good when you look at statistics. But they were 4 players that did really well together. And I always hated the core 4 narrative because Bernie Williams gets kind of left out because he was a little bit the generation before, but he was a big part of those, early 2000s championships as well. Andy Pettit, good pitcher. I could see him with Sabathia's election and the comparisons to Sabathia, him gaining some steam, but I don't think it'll be enough to be elected. And I think the steroids are the biggest reason why. We've seen the guys that are committed steroid guys, get 50+% of the vote, but not, really push election.
Moral of the story, Baseball Writers of America, cracking Cooperstown listeners, Buerhle. You can move on now.
Thank you. And we skipped around a little bit there to cover Andy Pettit. So we have to go back a little bit. So Jimmy Rollins is next, and this is another one where I think the comparison lifted a little bit. I don't remember what number he was at last year.
He finished at 12.9% last
year.
So
he's up right now. Yeah, so he's up right now in the projections at 19.1. And I think part of it is because of Chase Utley's booming success on the ballot. Is, people are like a lot of people are saying Jimmy Rollins is the, Lou Whitaker to the Alan Trammell. Like he is just as good, if not better, at a middle infield position that's underrepresented. If I had to vote for one of those two guys, I'm voting for Jimmy Rollins. Jimmy Rollins used to be someone I pumped for the Hall of Fame. Since I've created my own benchmarks, he's actually just outside. I wouldn't be mad if he was elected. But he's someone that I think is just getting a bump up from another candidate, much like Pettit is getting the bump up from Sabathia. And I think that's all it is. I don't think he's seriously going to push for Hall of Fame election.
Well, if all things held true for him, we're talking that he would bump to, like roughly 17% over his 12 last year, +5, 4th year of his ballot. Unlikely at this point to gain enough momentum to really make a difference.
Yeah, but a guy that deserves to be on the ballot all 10 years. That's 100%. All it is. Really good player, MVP, bunch of stolen bases, over 2,000 hits, stuff you like to see.
Yeah.
So next would be the real Phillies Hall of Famer on this ballot, Mr. Bobby Abreu. People have done this. If you line up Bobby Abreu next to Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley, there is no question to me that Bobby Abreu is the one that should be getting the Hall of Fame consideration. No question. And I know all the eye test people are saying Bobby Abreu never sounded or looked like a Hall of Fame player. But if you look at Bobby Abreu's career statistics, not just the WAR is surprisingly high, but he stole over 400 bases.
400 exactly.
Yeah. 400 exactly. He stole, he hit over 2,000 hits. He has over 60 WAR. He's a guy that's like right there as a borderline Hall of Famer. Like he is to a T that definition, and it's a guy where if he gets elected, you shouldn't be mad. But the fact that he's at 25%, he's one of my guys that gets a vote. I know I haven't voted for anyone since Ichiro and CC Sabathia, but Bobby Abreu gets my vote, and I think that he continues to rise on the writer's ballot, and I think he could be someone that, hits 50 or 60% by the end of it. I don't think he'd be elected by the writers, but a guy that, gets the proper attention while he's on the ballot, and then maybe an era committee, gives him his flowers.
30 hits short of 2,500, 47 runs short of, 1,500. He's a lot closer than people think. And no, I'm skipping ahead to Utley a little bit. There's no shot I would vote for Chase Utley. There's no shot I'd vote for Jimmy Rollins. I would vote for Bobby Abreu before either one of them, and I'm not voting for Abreu.
Yes.
So that tells you what I think of the other two guys. But Abreu's close. Like, he is one of those names that gets overlooked by the general fan in terms of Hall of Fame candidacy, that his numbers are a lot better than most people realize they are.
And in a highly produced junk wax era where players have like 1 million rookie cards, he has one. 1993 Fleer Excel, Bobby Abreu. His first card is his only 93 issue that I know of. If you know of another one, please let me know. It'll make me sad, but I'll be glad to know about it. But yeah, Bobby Abreu, man, like a guy that should be on a ton more ballots than he currently is, and he's slowly rising, and I think he's going to over time, hit that 50-60% threshold, which are the guys that eventually get elected someday. And it'll probably be on an era committee, not through the writers, but way better than you remember. And it's not just analytically, he hits counting stat numbers that are shockingly high too. It's not just one of those guys that has the big war, but like you don't see it in the stats. You can see why he has that war when you look at his stats.
Mm-hmm. If all things held true, he'd bump up to 23% as opposed to 14 last year. He has gained some votes. He's gained, he's gained 8, lost 2, so net positive of 6. He is in his 6th year on the ballot. Unlike Dom, I don't think he'll get to that 50% threshold mark in his time on the writers' ballot. I think it may be too little, too late for some of these guys realizing it, unless we see a big push in the next couple years. After we get through a long list of backlog in the era committee that he would be on, he's a more interesting name than a lot.
Yeah. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to clump Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez together.
Please do.
They're a hard no for me. I think they're a pretty useless conversation at this point. If the writers weren't going to elect Barry Bonds, who is rumored to have used steroids but never tested positive and served a suspension, why are they going to elect guys like Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez that failed multiple tests and served multiple suspensions with Major League Baseball, no matter how good their numbers are? I'm not saying A-Rod and Manny Ramirez are two of the best hitters I've ever seen, but they did it enhanced. It's been proven that they did it enhanced. They did it after Major League Baseball said it wasn't okay, and I'm going to hold that against them. The writers have been holding it against them. They're going to grow slowly over the years, but they're not going to get in.
They're going to hang around a third of the vote. That's where they're at. That's where they'll end up this year. And one thing that is interesting for them, and then we can move on. Some people that think that, well, as new voters come on to the Baseball Writers of America, that they're going to hold grudges less in terms of steroids or performance-enhancing drugs, that they're going to be more open to just looking the other way and just seeing the numbers that they compiled. Well, amongst the 12 new voters for this year, Manny and A-Rod both have only received 50% of those votes. Now, to give you a contrast, Beltran, who we're going to get to in a second, he's received 100% of the new voters. Andrew Jones has received 8 of the 12 new voters' support. Felix Hernandez, on the flip side, 2%. Omar Vizquel, to Dom's earlier point about the controversy surrounding him, he's received 1 vote amongst the 12 voters. So I think it does matter what the controversy is amongst the new voters, that the metrics support that. Because even at best, we're talking some of the most talented hitters of all time in Manny and A-Rod. Only 50% of new voters are saying, yep, we don't care, about the controversy surrounding them. We're going to vote for them anyways. 50% are still a no, which the general thought from most fans is like, oh, that's going to go away really soon. But that's not what we've seen over the last couple years.
Yeah, I mean, imagine getting the honor of submitting a Baseball Writers Association ballot and checking checking the box for Omar Vizquel on the first one. That's a move. That's a move.
Where you're going?
So next is a guy we've mentioned like 6 times throughout the show, Chase Utley, trending at 55%. We were shocked how high of a percentage he got his first year on the ballot. We're shocked again at how he's trending. I'm just at a loss of words. I don't get it. I understand all the people that talk about his peak. Now, second base necessarily isn't a position where, peak has really mattered. I can't think of a peak Hall of Fame second baseman. All the Hall of Fame second basemen have good career numbers to go along with said peak. People talk about his peak would be the 6th or 7th best of all time by a second baseman behind guys like Joe Morgan and Rogers Hornsby and Nat Lajoie and different names like that. inner circle second baseman. That 5 years, he accumulated a ton of WAR. He was a great hitter. The only player during that 5-year stretch of his prime that accumulated more WAR in all of Major League Baseball was Abreu. That's impressive. If he did that for a whole decade, I'd probably be voting for him. But he didn't. He fell off quite starkly. And he's one of those guys where you look at the WAR and you're like, oh, wow. And then you look at the rest of the Baseball Reference page and you're like, the rate stats are good. He was efficient, but he doesn't, his back of his baseball card does not say Hall of Famer anywhere. Like none of the statistics are like, wow. Like that's amazing. People say that his teammates robbed him of MVPs. Jimmy Rollins and Ryan Howard won MVPs when Chase Utley should have, and XYZ. I mean, Dustin Pedroia was able to win an MVP at second base in that same era with, a not super impressive season. So I don't really know where these Chase Utley truthers are coming from, and why there's not that many Philly writers on the ballot, but like it's just amazing that he's getting so much support, and I can say this confidently now, he will be a Hall of Famer through the writers, and he shouldn't be. And I talked about this with Andrew Jones, who we'll get into. The Rule of 2000 has stood since the expansion in 1969. The baseball writers have not elected a single candidate with less than 2,000 hits. A single one. It's been like a pretty solid benchmark. Now, there's very few guys that are like 2,030 hits. They're usually well above 2,000, but 2,000 is the benchmark. Andrew Jones is a special case because he has, those MVP finishes, the Gold Gloves, the 400 home runs. He's someone that could, be an exception to the rule. But Chase Utley, on the other hand, I don't think he's an exception to the rule. I think, if anything, he is writers seeing Andrew Jones gain support, seeing the cumulative stats since 2000, this modern era, be a little bit different. 3,000 strikeouts be less common, 3,000 hits be less common, 500 home runs be less common, all these things since they started cracking down on steroids. But I don't understand why Chase Utley continues to be propped up. He's someone that deserves to, get some consideration and be on the ballot all 10 years. I'll agree with you there. He was good. He was very good. But I think that this is the beginning of, we talked about the Hall of Fame being watered down because of Harold Baines, the Hall of Fame being watered down because of Scott Rowland. If they just start a trend where guys that are sub 2,000 hits start getting, voted in regularly, that can lower the standards of the Hall of Fame pretty significantly.
Chase Utley doesn't hit a single one of my metrics, not one. He's not even close. It's shocking. And Don talked more about his statistics. I'm going to talk more about some of the things that are happening on the ballot that don't make sense, but we're going to talk about it nonetheless. He finished last year at 28.8% on his first ballot, which was shocking in itself to begin with. Mm-hmm. So far, he's gained 16 votes, which is a lot. Interestingly enough, in his second year on the ballot, he's also lost 5 votes on a non-crowded year.
Those were probably the people that thought they needed to vote for him to stay on.
To keep him on.
And then he did way better than expected. They were like, he's fine. I can put that vote elsewhere.
Which that logic, whatever. But still, for you to vote for him as a first ballot Hall of Famer, even if you think you're trying to just keep him on the ballot, pretty shocking for you to drop on a non-crowded year where you don't have 10 other candidates to vote for if you're voting for Chase Utley. Or maybe you do because he's really low on the bar, if you ask me. That aside, net plus of 11 votes. If all things hold true, now Chase Utley is someone who dropped 10% from public results to private. But if it held the way that it is now, and he dropped 10%, that means he would finish at just under 45% and jump 17% in year 2 on a guy that we never.
He's gonna be one of those guys that jumps like 8 to 12% a year until he's elected. That's just what's gonna happen, and I don't agree. I don't.
Agree.
Like we said, when he's elected, we will honor him as a Hall of Famer.
Sure will.
We will. I won't collect him as a Hall of Famer. I won't pay those prices.
I will.
But like a lot of Hall of Fame people will. But yeah, it's really shocking. It's really shocking, and I think that's the biggest chance of watering down the Hall of Fame. The biggest shift potentially in the Hall of Fame. It's not the pitchers. It's not the catchers. It's the rule of 2,000 hits. Opening up this can of worms that can get kicked down the road quite a bit. To Utley does so well, those votes go to Pedroia, and then Pedroia does well, and the next guy with under 2,000 hits, and the next guy, and the next guy, and the next guy. David Wright might get some buzz. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen if Utley continues these trends. And for the fans in Philadelphia that said he was an obvious Hall of Famer, they loved him. That 5-year peak, Hall of Fame worthy, absolutely. But like I said, those mid-tier Hall of Famers that aren't the inner circle guys, they follow up those peaks with accumulation. And Chase Utley, his last couple years in the league, was a platoon bat for the Dodgers, like a veteran leadership on the bench. Like, he fell off, and father time gets to everybody. It's fine. But it shouldn't result in a plaque in Cooperstown to me. I wasn't expecting there to be this much support. Now, there would have been. I'm surprised that the number of people that dropped him is only 5, because to me it almost seemed like so many people thought they had to vote for him to keep on the ballot, and then a lot of people would have dropped off, but only a few people dropped off, which to me is completely reasonable. But yeah, even if it's only 8 to 10, whatever, he's going to gain more votes than he lost. So it's really crazy.
He's gotten 8 of the 12 votes among new first-time voters this year as well. So he's getting that support.
Same number as Andrew Jones, under 2,000 hits.
I know. And
it might be the same 8.
When we're talking about a second-year candidate in Utley possibly being over 40% on a guy that we didn't really think was Hall of Fame, a real Hall of Fame candidate, he could hit 50% in year 3. And then he's gonna
be over 50% in year 3.
Exactly. And if we continue to see this trend, we are likely going to. Then outside of Schilling, who's a different reason, then no one else has received 50% on the writer's ballot and not eventually been elected either on the writer's ballot or via a committee.
Well, that's a bunch of steroid guys.
Well, okay.
Have also over 50.
I guess I should say non-controversial
steroid guys, alleged steroid guys.
Yeah. He would be the only one if he didn't eventually gain election.
Yeah, it's not. We know there's a lot of Philly fans out there in the community that disagree with us, and that's completely fine. I hope you guys go out to Chase Utley's Hall of Fame ceremony, because it's going to happen in the next probably 5-10 years. So enjoy it. His rookie card, if it hasn't went up in value, it probably should, because he's someone that is going to be a Hall of Famer, which is not what I was expecting when he first hit the ballot.
He's a somewhat tough autograph as well. He doesn't really sign.
Yeah. That's the thing, though, with my Hall of Fame autograph project. I don't feel like I need to own an autograph of every Hall of Famer.
I do.
It would be nice to, but I don't feel like I need to. So he's not going to be someone I prioritize anyway. If he's tough and expensive right now, I'm not gonna pay that price, let alone the buffed up Hall of Fame price in a few years. But Chase Utley, we beat that into the ground.
We did.
We do not agree. But I'm putting the Kraken Cooperstown stamp on it. He will be a Hall of Famer. It is almost a certainty at this point. So moving right along here to the other guy with under 2,000 hits, Andrew Jones, who has a 1995 Bowman's Best rookie. I also prospected. I got an on-card auto of Andrew Jones, because I saw the same thing. A guy that, if the writer said no, I wouldn't be as upset and calling him the biggest snub ever, like some people. But, I thought he was above the Hall of Fame line. And he's trending really well. I think this ballot clearing out really helps Chase Utley helps Andrew Jones, helps Carlos Beltran, who we're about to get into. Joe Mauer getting in first ballot helped. Todd Helton finally getting off the ballot helped. Scott Rowland finally getting off the ballot helped. Billy Wagner's about to get off the ballot and help some more. Andrew Jones, like I said, his argument simply is, one of the greatest defensive center fielders of all time, 10 Gold Gloves, and 400 home run power to go with it. And that's an elite class. We talked about it. It's Mike Schmidt, it's Ken Griffey Jr., it's Willie Mays. That's it. You lower it to 300 or 350, you start getting into like the Al K lines and different people of the world. But it's an elite class. He was a guy that passes a lot of people's eye test, and I think is in a really good position to be elected to the Hall of Fame next year. I don't think he makes it this year. What say you?
I don't think he makes it this year. He is one of the bigger gainers. He's gained 9 votes. He's actually gained 12 and lost 3 for a net positive of 9. I also think it's weird that he's lost 3 in the middle of his candidacy on a non-crowded ballot, 8th year for him. I think next year could be the year, though. If all things hold true this year, he would bump from 61.6% to around 66%, being just 9% short. Good chance that he could creep up to that number next year as we clear out a few more names. And I don't think a ton of huge names coming in next year. And if he somehow hangs around to the 10th ballot, I think he's going to be close enough. I think he'll be over 70% at that point if he makes it to his 10th ballot. And that 10-year push will happen. And he's going to get in with the writers. That jump that he had from 22 to 2023 of 17% from 41 to 58, I think made it a reality that it was eventually going to happen. I wasn't so sure until that point that he would get in with the writers, but I think he will now.
Yep, and that's exactly what's happening with Chase Utley right now. Is that big jump when people didn't expect it is going to help him get in. And I'm fine with Andrew Jones being in the Hall of Fame. I think center field is the most deep position in baseball history. I think if you look at the all-time center fielders, like there's so many great names inside and outside of the Hall of Fame. And Andrew Jones is above that line of being worthy and a guy that I will celebrate as a Hall of Famer. I already collect him as a future Hall of Famer. And I'm happy to see him trending in the right direction. But like I said, I'm predicting next year, not this year. Though this year is still technically in the cards for both him and Carlos Beltran. Now, I'm going to give you the floor, even though we're both big fans of Carlos Beltran, as to why it's fantastic that the 12 new voters have all voted yes for Carlos Beltran and that he's finally getting the much needed support in this not crowded ballot.
Carlos Beltran, amongst clean players, no PED allegations, to have 2,500 plus hits, 400 plus home runs, 1,500 plus runs, and 1,500 RBIs, it's him and Willie Mays. That's it. That's the list. Beltran had a limited amount of controversy around him with the whole trash can banging around the Astros. He was a part of that team. It cost him the managerial job with the Mets, and I think it cost him votes early on in his candidacy, first year and second year. Last year, he did jump up to 57.1%, and this year he is the biggest plus-minus gainer amongst all returning guys on the ballot. At plus 20, he's gained 21 votes and lost 1. So plus 20. He fell 69 votes short of election last year, meaning if there were exact same number of voters, he'd be 49 more votes short of election that he needs the rest of the way. He did drop just over 9% from the public to the private. He currently sits at 80.4%. If that trend held exactly true, he would be just above 70% results this year. But that's close enough that it could go either way for the class of 2025. Now, I think that he's going to just miss. I think he will hit around that 70-ish percent, and we could see Beltran inducted as a Hall of Famer next year. And I'm very pro Beltran. I'm excited about it. I think he's one of the most underrated guys on the ballot. since Tim Raines.
Heading into the ballot when it first came out, I didn't think this was the year. I think this is the year. I think Carlos Beltran gets in on this ballot. I'm voting for him, and I think that over 75% of the voter base will. And I think that, I compared his candidacy to Vladimir Guerrero Sr., who was snubbed from being a first ballot guy, but got in very quickly after. And I think that's what Carlos Beltran, is. He's not an inner circle, like all-time great. The only switch hitters with more home runs than Carlos Beltran are Chipper Jones, Eddie Murray, and Mickey Mantle. He is a obvious Hall of Famer, again, at that very deep center field position. And we talked about, power and speed, and, guys in the 300 home run, 300 stolen base club, which are my two, qualifiers. That combination of power and speed is actually not very common. There's 9 players that have ever done that. So
the 4 things I mentioned plus 300 stolen bases, I misspoke earlier. Those things that I mentioned plus 300 is him and Mace.
Mm-hmm. There's only 9 players that have 300 and 300 in the history of baseball, and that in itself is special. And having 70 WAR accumulated, much like Scott Rowland, he's not at 55 WAR, he's at 70 WAR. Like that's a real accumulated number. And what's crazy about Carlos Beltran is there's a lot of guys that like start really strong and then fall off, but compile at the end, or, start slow and then, in their late 20s and 30s, they become Hall of Famers. Carlos Beltran was kind of steady Eddie throughout his whole career. Like he came into the league right away, 194 hits, went 22 home runs and 27 stolen bases, won the Rookie of the Year. Almost every single big league season he played, he had over 100 hits, and was quality all the way through the end, bouncing around 2 competitive teams. And something about Carlos Beltran's resume that never gets brought up because of that scandal with a playoff run at the very end of his career is that he was a fantastic playoff performer. He had so many dominant postseason runs as a member of the Mets, as a member of the Astros his first time around. He stepped up in big games to go along with like well above Hall of Fame regular season stats. And usually that postseason success is a bump for people's candidacy. I know it ended on a stale note, but he got his championship ring that he'll be able to keep with him for the rest of his life. So Carlos Beltran, slam dunk Hall of Famer to me. And I think the writers are finally either realizing it or, giving into the fact that he always was one.
I think they gave him the slap on the wrist with the trash can thing, and now he's gonna get in next year.
Next year, we'll next year, if he doesn't get in this year, he will get in next year. But I think this is the year. And what's exciting about that is that means it would be a 6-man class, because I believe these next 3 guys are getting in. This next returning guy, along with CC Sabathia and Ichiro Suzuki. So Billy Wagner. We talked about him during the K-Rod conversation a little bit. I understand on a rate basis, he's more impressive than K-Rod. He was extremely efficient, strikeout through the nose, like left-handed, makes him, a unicorn in a lot of ways. He missed by 4 votes last year. He's not a scandalous guy. He's going to get in. That's just the nature of it. His rookie card is a 1994 Upper Deck, I believe. 1994 Bowman. I don't have that yet. It's on my eBay save search, and I'm probably just gonna buy it before Tuesday because he's gonna be in. The only thing is, like, does that card start to get way more graded, and then I can get one cheaper down the road? Probably. But it'll be really interesting to see, what Billy Wagner's gain is this year. With him being 4 off, like, are a lot of people going to give him the pat to get him in and he gets in easily, or is he going to get in at like 77% or something small? So it'll be interesting. And I know me and you, we talked about this. We don't think that Billy Wagner is a Hall of Famer in our merits, but clearly the writers have grown on him and think that that type of reliever is Hall of Fame worthy. So what do you think about the upcoming election of Billy Wagner here in his final year on the ballot?
So he's gained 8 votes from returning voters. He has not lost any amongst the 12 new voters, first-time voters this year. He's gotten all 12 votes. He currently sits at 84.7%. If he loses 4% amongst the public voters, the private voters by comparison, which is what he lost last year, that means he would land at 80%. I think he's getting in. I think on his final year, he's getting in. I actually don't think it'll be as close to 75%, like a 76 or something like that. I think he's going to be in the upper 70s and maybe crack that 80% on his final year of eligibility. And to me, if Wagner gets in, I'll honor him and applaud him as a Hall of Famer and celebrate that. I'll collect him as a part of my Hall of Fame collection. But I think that, like we've mentioned before already on this 2-hour marathon of a podcast, that Wagner's election could be more of a landmark election in terms of relievers and what the future of the Hall of Fame looks like. It's actually, in my opinion, probably bigger than Billy Wagner, what his election might mean for the Hall. So I'll be interested to see how it impacts things going forward because I do believe he's going to be a Hall of Famer come this summer.
Yeah, so you have it as a 3-man class with Wagner, Suzuki, and Sabathia. I have it as a 4-man class with Beltran added in there. So that's the show, everybody. That's the ballot. As it sits right now, we're at 42%. We do expect over the weekend for us to, maybe get closer to 45-ish% as people like release it right before the election. But it'll be interesting to see where the percentages fall. I think, how far above 75 does Wagner get is interesting. I think how close to 75 Beltran and Jones get is interesting. And what the actual leap is that Chase Utley is making, because it's going to be a leap, but how big of a leap is interesting. Torrey Hunter falling off the ballot is a shame, and the writers should be ashamed of themselves. But this is the best time of the year, and the fact that we're going to have a Hall of Fame class with Dave Parker and Dick Allen of at least 5, possibly 6, like that's huge for the Hall of Fame. That's great for baseball. It'll open up the ballot even more for next year. And we'll talk about, who's on after this election. We'll talk about like looking ahead to who's going to be on the ballot next year and do all those great things as well. But keep collecting these guys, prospect for future Hall of Famers, and just have fun with this hobby, man. I know the Hall of Fame, it sparks up, a lot of debate, heated and friendly. There's a lot, of negativity. I tried to talk about it at the beginning of the show with the guys at 0% of the vote. It's an honor for these guys to be on the ballot, point blank, period. Even if I don't think they're a Hall of Famer, it doesn't mean I don't think they're a great player. That's those two things can be separated. And we can disagree, we can agree, and you can continue this conversation with us over on Instagram, Jake over at Let Us Never Die Collection, and me over at Staven Sports Cards. Hit us up, comment below with if you had a vote, who your ballot of 10 up to 10 would be. And we'll debate and discuss this all the way up and past through the Tuesday election, January 21st.
So in closing, for my co-host, Dom, I want to tell you guys, keep collecting. God bless. And hey, Dom, you're a Hall of Famer in my book.
You too, bud.